Good thinking.
Sorry, I can't do two things at
It's
once.
all
I
right. It's the thing that I always forget to
apologise.
do.
Here we go.
Brilliant. So as I said, we've sent out the code of conduct, which we send out for all our training and sessions. But just as a quick reminder before we get started, so we want our Kids in Museums training sessions to be a space for respectful discussion and debate. We strive to encourage a non-judgmental environment where people can freely share their challenges and successes. We ask that all delegates are sensitive to how they're discussing topics in the session. If anyone feels uncomfortable, please feel free to step away from the session. Are aware of any confidentiality and only share general information rather than any specifics about colleagues or the children, families, or young people they're working with. If you move on to the next slide, please, Alison.
Sorry, it's not moving. Hold on a sec. There we go.
Are mindful of the privacy of others and consider this if taking screenshots, for example. Attend with an open mind and participate in a way that feels meaningful to them. Both active listening and asking questions are fine. Recognise and value diversity, handle any disagreements constructively and calmly, and consider their own self-care after the session. Do not share confidential information shared in the training after the session. Are respectful of all speakers and other delegates, and use positive, constructive language to make comments and ask questions. So that's all of our code of conduct. So we're now going to move on to just a very brief overview about kids in museums, because you'll be finding out a lot more about us throughout the session today. But basically, we are a small charity and we work with museums, heritage sites, and cultural venues across the UK to make them more welcoming and inclusive for children, young people, and families. Our values are to be collaborative, inclusive, responsive, supportive, and welcoming. So, a lot more to come about what we do, but just a quick overview about our objectives for today's session. So, we're going to be sharing key trends and developments in family and young people's audience behaviour since COVID, hearing about free Kids in Museums online resources, and finding out about Kids in Museums initiatives such as Takeover Day, plus consultancy services, including family-friendly museum audits. So I'm going to stop speaking for now, and I'm going to hand straight over to Alison, who's going to be giving us a bit of a sort of sharing the key trends and developments in family and young people's audience behaviour since COVID. So over to you, Alison.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alison Bowyer. I'm the Executive Director of Kids and Museums, and it's so lovely to see so many of you here today to hear about our programmes. I'm having a few problems with my computer moving slides on, so please do bear with me if it takes me a little bit longer than it should do. So what I want to do is just give a bit of an overview of the national picture of what we think is going on with children, families, young people attending museums. And this is mainly focused on data from England, but from what we know, trends in other parts of the UK are similar. I'm going to be looking at the sort of 5 year span from the start of the pandemic through to where we are now. So I think what's worth saying first of all is that during that time, there hasn't been that much data available. There was audience surveying done about audiences returning after COVID, but during the early part of the pandemic, the DCMS suspended what was then the National Taking Part Survey, where they were collecting data about 5 to 15-year-olds' cultural and heritage participation regularly. And when they reinstated a new national survey, what is now the participation survey, it didn't include anything about under 16s. So there's been quite a big gap, particularly in data about children's activity in museums, both inside and outside of school. And the Arts Council has recently filled this gap to some degree with something they published earlier this year. So, a big survey by company Varian, which is a sample of about 24,000 children, young people, and their families. And that, for the first time, gives a kind of new insight into what is specifically going on with the under 16 age group. So the overall trends, this is probably not a surprise, given both the pandemic and the the cost of living crisis. So we've seen for both under 16s and 16 to 24s, we've seen a decline in the number who are visiting a museum at least once in a 12-month period. And for both groups, it is a decline that is sort of beyond the margin of error. It has some kind of statistical significance. And at the same time, school trips are declining. There's less good survey data on this. This is kind of piecing lots of different things together from beyond what the DCMS collect about their national museums. But the overall picture is of a decline, getting us back to a position where we potentially were about 10 years ago. But I guess within the context, none of that is probably a huge surprise. So moving on to look a bit about who is most underrepresented in these audiences. Again, I doubt that any of this will come as a surprise to people. So there is still a gap in attendance between disabled children and young people and their able-bodied peers. And given the numbers of families, Baker Richards surveying this summer, about 40% of families were self-identifying as having someone in their family who was disabled or had an additional need. This is a concern that needs addressing. We're also seeing fewer children and young people from some, but not all, global majority backgrounds being underrepresented. This is quite interesting because the data from the Arts Council and Varian, we're seeing that some global majority backgrounds, so particularly Southeast Asian, British, Chinese and Chinese, their attendance is catching up with white British, as is people from mixed backgrounds. But the backgrounds that are particularly underrepresented are Black and Black British, Bangladeshi and Pakistani backgrounds. And then finally, the Varian data from the Arts Council is showing some really big regional disparities about who's going to museum. And again, with sort of what's happened with investment in cultural infrastructure, this is also perhaps not a huge surprise, and I guess also with the tourist pull of London. But in London, children from London, about nearly two-thirds go to a museum once a year. But outside London, in the West Midlands, it's only 39%. So you can see there that there is a really huge difference. And this kind of really supports the arguments that are being made by people like the English Civic Museums Network about the need for more investment in regional culture so we can start to provide children and families in these areas with better provision. If it's okay, if I can just remind people to mute so background noise isn't disturbing people, that would be great. Thank you. And then I think the other area of underrepresentation we're seeing is social class. Again, this is not going to be a surprise with the cost of living crisis and the number of families that are really just struggling to afford the essentials. Cost of living overtook COVID in 2023 as the main barrier why people weren't going to museums. We've seen big declines in school trips, the most have been from disadvantaged areas, and 16 to 24-year-olds from deprived areas in the participation survey, they are the least likely to visit. And there's also some emerging evidence that level of education or parental education is playing a big part in who is and isn't going to museums. So there been an American study by a couple of academics called Laura Crispin and Molly Peck, and they have looked at a national data set of people with and without college education, and they found that people with college education are about 12% more likely to visit a museum than those who've only completed high school. And some work being done at the Centre for Museum Galleries Research at Leicester University, looking at the sort of the ongoing trends in inequality that have sort of happened across the past decade in museum attendance. Their analysis of the data is showing that a bachelor's level degree is in fact the most likely predictor of whether someone does or doesn't go to a museum. So there's not that much work done on this at the moment, and it's not data a lot of museums collect, but there's something potentially interesting here going forward. So it's an overall picture, which is probably not surprising. Not a lot has changed, but I think now, as we're hopefully starting to maybe approach something after the pandemic, a bit of a sort of settling down, just to refocus people on these inequalities. And it's not all bleak. There are museums doing brilliant work to change them, changes possible to attract, to bring some of these underrepresented audiences in. But I think it's just something that, as a sector, we need to be really aware of as we're moving forward. And then just quickly to think about some of the reasons we think these groups aren't coming. I guess in terms of access, there isn't really a silver bullet there's not one thing a museum can change. People who aren't confident about going to museums, they talk about getting there as being like going through a maze. So everyone has their specific route, and there are lots of different barriers that affect people differently along the way. So some of the things that we think are important, price is obviously still a factor. Museums tend to be perceived as expensive, and families feel they have limited leisure time, so they're making time money calculations all the time. And if they think they're not going to have fun in a museum, that means they score badly compared to something like going to the zoo or going to the cinema. There is a willingness to pay. Families do like free attractions, but there is a willingness to pay where there's perception that there'll be value for money for a day out. And value for money extends across everything from cafe, shop, additional activities. It's not just about the ticket price. But that said, ticketing still isn't working for a lot of families. In the research that Baker Richards did about family audiences this summer, just over 40% said that the availability of family tickets, what was on offer at the moment, didn't meet the needs of their family. For young people, there are issues around consistencies of discounting. And for both families and young people, there's a real desire for museums to be more transparent about what things cost. So it's really clear before you get there what things are going to cost. So there's no embarrassment when you get to the till. So there's an issue which kind of feeds into the other thing on the slide about poor information. Families really want more information from museums before they visit so they can plan. They want to know whether things are age suitable. They want to know about costs. They really want to know about facilities. And a lot of museums still aren't brilliant at providing this information in a way that families understand. And this also feeds into this next point about access. I was mentioning the increasing numbers who are identifying as having additional needs. Obviously, there's other kinds of access needs as well in terms of language, cost, things like that. But just focusing in a minute on additional needs, these families still feel that there are a lot of barriers for them getting through the door. Some surveying by Ewan's Guide, about 90% of disabled people want to check a website before they go, and about 70% won't go if there's no access information. So having those access pages is really vital. For these families too, there is a massive fear of being judged. This happens a little bit with other families as well, but it's particularly pertinent for these families. And there's also still a perception that there isn't a great range of activities and interpretation that's suitable for people with additional needs. So then looking at some of the other things, what we've called social and attitudinal barriers. There's still a perception that museums are not places normal families go. They're not perceived as fun. There is a strong perception that museums are about learning, which is both a motivating factor for some families who really value being able to support their children's learning, but for others, it can be a real turn off. Their families increasingly want to go somewhere where they can relax together and sort of make nice memories. And museums are not often perceived as particularly relaxing places to go. They're seen as stressful with lots of unwritten rules and sort of a fear of not knowing how to behave. And some work that Caddy did in Wales, there was a perception coming through there which I thought was quite interesting, that there just wasn't stuff for children to do. So as a result, families felt that they wouldn't be welcome at all with their children. And obviously, these are really hard things to address, but just things like thinking about sort of family reviews are really important, images of families having a good time, those sorts of things, just to show people that maybe some of the perceptions they hold could be adjusted. And in the research that the Arts Council did with Varian, there's an interesting thing with kids that they did that shows that there's a real difference between perception and reality. And when they visited a museum, the children who perceived them as being boring and stuffy and not fun had their minds changed. So if you can get them through the door, there's real potential. So yeah, just moving on to some of the things children and young people talk about. I've kind of already covered the children bit, but young people, as they're going through teenage years, there's sort of a change in attitude that you see between the ages of 12 and 14. They suddenly think there's too much tax, there's nothing for them to do. They want to be able to visit independently, but they're often put off or can't. And they feel that museums aren't relevant to their interests. Young people are also, interestingly, a group that are really sensitive to crowding. Throughout all the groups, there is a growing intolerance of museums being crowded, which may stem from the pandemic, but it's particularly prevalent amongst young people. And then finally, just to reinforce the value of consultation and collaboration, but done in a way that is long term and builds trust rather than being short term. So I hope that's been a useful summary. I'm aware I've probably taken a bit longer than I should have done, but I'm just going to briefly stop sharing, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
So someone was asking, do you know if the variant ACE research is likely to be repeated or regular?
Interesting question. The answer is no, but the report interestingly says that their fieldwork is still going on. So I'm anticipating at least that there might be some future data, but I don't know if it's something that Arts Council are planning to repeat. And obviously, if they don't, then the gap opens up in that regular research again.
No other, oh, no other questions at the moment. So maybe if anyone has anything else, please do pop those in the chat and we can come back to them. But just for sort of time, I might continue if that's okay. So I was going to talk about our online resources, but before I do that, I thought it might be useful just to give you a bit of an overview about our work generally with the sector so that when I'm talking about our resources, it makes a bit more sense. So we have our 6-point manifesto, which kind of underpins all the work that we do. This is put together with children, young people, and families about what makes a really good experience for them in a museum. And what we do is we update our manifesto every 2 to 3 years. It kind of covers everything from facilities, interactions with staff and volunteers, collaboration with that audience. It's free to sign up to. We've got about 1,200 museums across the UK and indeed the world signed up so far. You can have a look on our website to sort of see whether the organisations you're working with are on the list. We also have our annual Family Friendly Museum Award, and that's the only museum award that's judged by families. Alison's going to talk a bit more about that later. We have Takeover Day, and that's where children and young people take over staff roles for the day. Again, I'm going to pick up on this in a moment. And we also have over 100 online resources, which I'm going to talk about now. And just to say, we update our resources every year. We usually sort of have about 4 new resources that go onto our website, and they're free to access. And they cover everything around working with children, young people, and families that you could probably wish for. But just to go through a few that might be useful for you to either use in your own work or to highlight to the people you're working with. So firstly, our manifesto. So as I mentioned, it underpins all the work that we do. And in order for museums to kind of, I suppose, use the manifesto to become more family friendly, we do have our no and low cost ways to meet our manifesto. This is particularly useful for those museums or venues which maybe don't have a lot of staff time, don't have a lot of resource. We also, over the last couple of years, have introduced our Kids in Museums manifesto self-assessment tool. And this is something that museums can use to assess how family friendly they are as an organisation. And just to give you a bit of a flavour of that tool. So basically, it goes through each manifesto point. You can score yourselves out of 5. We always recommend that museums do this with a front facing, either volunteer or member of staff, to really get that insight into how families are using the venue already. After this, filling in the form, you can kind of look at what you're doing well, what the strengths of the organisation are, but also where you want to make improvements. And for that, it's basically thinking about what kind of short, medium, or long-term things can you change to make your venue better for families. So that's just a bit of a brief overview about the self-assessment tool. We also have lots of online resources that relate to our other initiatives. So, as I mentioned, Takeover Day is where children and young people take over staff roles for the day. We have lots of case studies from organisations that have done Takeover Day before to provide inspiration. We also have how-to guides, which include things like films, materials such as certificates that museums can print off and give to children on the day. So, lots of kind of advice about how to run Takeover Days. We also have guidelines around our Family Friendly Museum Awards every year, so how to enter the award, but also nomination materials and other materials that museums can use. So the nomination materials, for example, include some really nice nomination cards for children and families to use to nominate their museums. And moving on, obviously Alison was talking a lot around kind of barriers to participation, and that includes accessibility. So in terms of economic accessibility, we have resources that can help museums to kind of think about how they can make improvements to become more accessible to families maybe on low incomes. So that includes our poverty proofing case study that we did with Jarrow Hall a couple of years ago. We also have lots of resources that relate to kind of families with additional needs, and often these are created with experts. So, for example, we work quite a lot with Sam Bowen, who a lot of you might know runs Sending Museums, and she's worked with us on the Welcoming Families with Special Educational Needs and Disabilities resource. Moving on to young people, so just in case you don't know, Kids in Museums, our kind of age range is 0 to 25. So we really want to make sure that museums are also accessible to young people. So that includes how you might consult with young people through setting up a youth panel, also how you might support their mental health. So this was a recent resource that we launched last year around supporting mental health and wellbeing for young people, and also around how you might support young people to gain employability skills. So actually that resource, we had our Kids in Museums youth panel come up with some really great ideas for how to make work placements more kind of meaningful for young people after they maybe haven't had good experiences in their own placements. So some really good advice on that resource. In terms of family resources, I thought I'd highlight these 3 resources, which are usually in our sort of top 5 of most used resources. Really practical guides to how to create family-friendly exhibitions, self-guided resources, and family-friendly interpretation. And then just to highlight a few new resources we've just literally kind of added over the last sort of 6 months. So we worked with the Sussex Baby Lab about welcoming babies to museums and galleries. So that's including a lot of their research on this area in museums, and also around kind of capturing family data, evaluating and consulting with families. So that's a suite of 3 new resources we've just added to the website. So I just wondered if there's any questions. I'm going to pause here, just see if there's any questions about the resources that we've got on our website, or any idea. If you want to put in the chat any ideas for kind of new resources you'd like to see as well, please do pop them in there. I don't know if
So
Alice.
not a question specifically about, oh, sorry, not a question specifically about resources, but PC has just asked, does it make a difference linking the activities and displays to the national curriculum?
That's an interesting one. I think I might actually ask Alison about this, but I think one of the things it can be quite useful in some ways, but as Alison mentioned, in terms of I suppose informal visits to museums, then a lot of families maybe don't want that kind of educational experience and do just want some fun. But Alison, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add on to that.
No, I think as Laura said, it's families sort of they want to understand how things can support their children's learning, but I think for a kind of out of school visit, that's kind of going to be in light, a more kind of lighter touch way. So just by not going heavy on text, families really don't like lots of text. They like other ways to discover. But yeah, I don't think it's easy to give a definitive answer to that. I think it's kind of yes and no.
Any other questions, Alison?
Um, no, no questions. Just Rachel Moss very kindly saying that the employability resource is really good.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. So yeah, what I might do then is I'll move on to talk a bit more about our Kids in Museums initiatives. And actually, I'm going to hand back to Alison just to kind of give you a bit of an overview of some of the initiatives we haven't already mentioned before I sort of talk in a bit more detail about some of the other things that we do.
Great, thanks, Laura. So, Laura's already mentioned our manifesto. You can see here the nice roundel you get if you sign up, and museums can put that on their website to show that they're committed to working with families. Then below that, you can see our family cafe standards. So, that is an accreditation scheme we developed with families and with Belugo that covers everything families want to see in a cafe. The accreditation is valid for 2 years and it goes through all areas of a cafe offer like food, facilities, pre-visit information. And it's a really good way to create a great family offer. Then we've got the Family Friendly Museum Awards. So I'm sure you're all aware our annual award for the best museum for families in the UK. So the 2026 award is soon open. So we will be open for nominations, which will open on the 10th of February. And our categories this year are Best Small, Medium and Large Museum, which we determined by number of visits, Best Accessible Museum, and then our special category for 2026 is Best Museum Careers Project. So if you're working with museums who you think are doing a great job for families or with access or have a great careers offer, please encourage them to enter. Winners report real benefits to staff morale, visitor numbers, being part of sector networks. It's free to enter, so it's a really brilliant opportunity. And then finally, just to highlight the free trails we make available to museums during school holidays. So we have a number of collaborations with children's book publishers. The one you can see on the screen, Art School, is coming up in February, where we're working with Hachette on the Art School in a Book, which is linked to the Talk Art podcast. But we also regularly work with other publishers to create a range of trails that work in all different kinds of museums. We provide all the resources for free. We send them out to the museums, and they make great half-term activities. About pretty much 100% of the museums who do them say they do them again. So they're a really good opportunity to be aware of. So I'm going to pass back to you now, Laura. I can't hear you, Laura, but I think that might just be me.
No, I did. I'd muted myself on my microphone. Thank you very much. I thought I'd start with talking a bit about Takeover Day and kind of how what that offers for museums. So it can be a really good opportunity to pilot new ways of working for museums. So that could be working with new partners. So although Takeover Day this year is on the 20th of November, which is a Friday, so obviously for a lot of museums they do tend to work with school groups. But actually, we are flexible around the date. So if museums want to work with different types of groups, that could be informal learning groups, maybe youth groups, uniform groups, for example. It's kind of a very flexible model. But also museums might decide to kind of work with a group that maybe they've worked with before and they want to sort of deepen that relationship. It can be a really good opportunity for them to kind of highlight what they're doing to a wider audience. So for a lot of museums, they might invite, for example, local press to come down, maybe the local mayor or councillors, or internally to sort of help with advocacy. They might invite sort of trustees or their directors to come and sort of either be taken over or see what's going on. And it can be a really good opportunity for staff across the whole organisation to get involved. So not just those that kind of specialise in learning and working with children, young people in their sort of day-to-day jobs. We get some really nice feedback from museums that a lot of museum staff really gain a lot of confidence through doing Takeover Day and really enjoy doing it as well. And in terms of what it offers for young people, so for the last few years, we've really gone back to our roots of Takeover Day. We've been running for Takeover Day for around over 10 years now. And we've had a careers theme, which we're going to continue this year as well. So it can be a really good opportunity for children, young people to kind of learn about different career opportunities in the sector. So there's different roles that are being taken over. Just a few pictures on the slide here to sort of illustrate that. So we've got front of house roles, things like tour guiding, objects in focus talks, things like co-creating exhibitions and displays in the museum, and also young people can and children can become consultants as well, and sort of really help museums to kind of shape their offer for that audience. As a result, a lot of the young people that take part in Takeover Day really feel like their museum is something that kind of really belongs to them. They get that sense of ownership and often want to come back again and kind of bring their friends and family with them. And they get that really good opportunity to develop new skills, for example, soft skills, so gaining confidence about talking to people they don't know, team building skills, all those kind of great soft skills that museums are great at kind of supporting young people to develop. And it's, as I said, an event which is quite a flexible model. So you can the museums can kind of choose how they run the event. So that could just be working with one young person or one child, maybe a work experience student, for example, a small group, or they could have their entire organisation taken over. It could be a particular role or a range of roles that are taken over. So it also kind of social media platforms could be taken over as part of Takeover Day as well. And as we said earlier, it can take place on different dates. So if the Friday doesn't work for museums, then you can still take part at different times of the year. So that's just a little bit about Takeover Day. So I thought it might be useful now to talk a bit more about our sector training. So we basically have national training, which is anyone can attend. So that includes free sessions, a bit like today's cuppa session. So one we've got coming up is all around the Family Friendly Museum Award shortlist for last year for our young people's and social justice projects. We also run cuppas on things like entering the Family Friendly Museum Award and running takeover days. If you are working with any museums or heritage sites in Wales, we also offer free training sessions for Welsh museums, usually about four or five times a year, and they are actually funded by the Welsh Government, so that means we can offer them for free. We also have paid for training sessions. So they usually last sort of anything for an hour and a half to kind of 2.5 hours and cover a range of different subjects. So one we've got coming up, for example, is all about how you might plan and run family workshops. That's really aimed at maybe early career people or maybe front of house staff or volunteers that maybe aren't used to running family activities. Our ticket prices basically run from £5. That's for kind kind of sort of low wage or students, up to recording and live tickets, which are £40, and for freelancers, there's a rate of £21. And basically, I thought I'd also highlight something that's coming soon. So this is hot off the press. Not many people know about this, but we have got a front of house essentials on-demand course that's coming up, and we're going to launch that in February. And so have a look out for that. This has been developed with Sam Bowen from Sending Museums, and it's about welcoming families with additional needs. So this is really aimed at front of house staff or volunteers. So do have a look out for that. It's coming soon. And then in terms of the consultation that we do, we are able to offer bespoke training for organisations. And this could be delivered online or in person. This slide gives you a few examples of the sorts of training topics that we run. So things like front of house training around creating family-friendly interactions, working meaningfully with young people, but also we can do other topics as long as it relates to children, young people and families. We can also run train the trainer sessions. So on our website, we do have the prices for the online sessions, but anything that's in person, we have to quote for individually just because it depends on the location of the training and how many training sessions that the organisation wants us to run. And then I also thought I'd talk a little bit about our reviews and audits. So just to mention that our reviews are quite a new thing. We've basically introduced these as a low-cost way to think about how to become more family friendly. So I suppose if you think about the manifesto self audit framework as sort of I suppose something that museums can do themselves. But for reviews, this would include a consultant working with the museum once they've kind of created their self-assessment framework and kind of making some really good sort of recommendations for how they might improve their offer, where they might get started, and show some examples of good practice in the sector. There's also, so they get a short report and they have optional mentoring time within that as well. And rather than me going through what an audit is, we thought it might be useful just to show you a short film, which is including me, but it will just explain what our audits are. So hopefully this will play and you can hear and see everything okay. So. Hiya, I'm Laura and I'm the Head of Programmes at Kids in Museums, and I'm here at Tenby Museum and Art Gallery to undertake a Kids in Museums family-friendly audit today. Family-friendly museum audits are a great way to get an external perspective on how your site can be more welcoming to children, young people and families. An audit is suitable for museums of any size and budget. It begins with an initial meeting with your staff, where we'll discuss what you hope to achieve from the audit, allowing us to tailor it specifically to your organisation's needs. We'll then carry out the audit itself with an on-site visit and create a detailed report complete with photos of your site. This will highlight the areas that are working well and identify those that could use improvement. Finally, we'll offer practical suggestions for making those improvements, drawing on real examples from other organisations to inspire and guide you. We have provided audits for museums of all sizes across the UK. If you're interested in having expert feedback on your family offer, email laura@kidsinmuseums.org.uk to discuss how Kids in Museums can help you. I'm going to stop sharing there because it looks like I just wanted to keep playing the film. Hopefully that was useful just to give you a bit of an overview about our work, our initiatives and our consultancy work as well. But we didn't know if you've got any questions about any of the things I've just talked about or anything else we've covered in the session. So you can either pop those in the chat or if you do want to either wave at us if you've got your camera on, we can answer any questions, or if you do want to use the react button, which is the heart in the bottom, you can always put your hand up that way. I think someone was asking about the charge for the audit. So the audit is 1,650, and there's a couple of different options. So one includes some mentoring time with a shorter report, and one is a more in-depth report. So yeah, hope that's helpful. Don't know if there's any other questions.
There've been a few in the chat while you've been talking, so just to highlight some of those, we do cover Northern Ireland, so yeah, Northern Irish museums can get involved in all the stuff we do, and we work with Northern Ireland Museums Council to deliver training and just explaining that even though we're called Kids in Museums, our offer extends to libraries, archives, castles, historic homes, any kind of outdoor heritage. So um, we're kind of anybody who's looking after something old, really. And actually it's applicable to even cultural organisations too. So it's a very big intent. We want to be better for children, young people and families.
And libraries have done Takeover Day before. In fact, is it National Library Wales? They've done it
Yeah,
quite a few
National Library
times.
of Wales
Yeah.
did take over day last year. Um, do we offer any resources for very young children under two? Um, and do museums reach out to us to work with strategy for that age group?
I suppose in terms of our online resources, we do, so the self-guided resources, for example, that includes kind of how you might create something for under fives, as well, because we usually recommend that museums create something that's, I suppose, an under fives resource so that they can lead that activity. Because I think sometimes it's always the parent carers that are kind of reading out things for older children, younger children. So we always recommend sort of creating their own ones. I think we have done collaborations before for our trails with publishers. I can't remember the name of the one that we did. It was all the rhyming trail. Do you remember that one?
Oh, the Nick Sharratt Super Silly Museums.
Yeah, yeah, that was really good fun.
And actually, the babies resource Laura mentioned, that has an example in it of a trail for babies. So Brighton Pavilion Museum have created a trail for babies in pushchairs that's sort of specific to them.
Yeah. And we have done, I think, sort of audits for museums that were particularly kind of working on under fives kind of provision and improving that. So we kind of focus the audit more on their under fives provision. So yeah, we have done that before. Does that help with that question? Did you see there was a question about a practitioner version of the manifesto, which we don't currently have?
Yeah, no, I mentioned that. Um, Instead of collaborating with publishers, have you thought about working with freelance illustrators directly? Um, we'd love to be able to work with freelance illustrators directly. However, this is a purely financial thing. The publishers donate everything in kind, so they print all the resources for the museums for us in kind. They distribute them all for us in kind. So we don't have the resources to do that ourselves at the moment. If we were able to find funds, we'd love to create trails with freelance illustrators and do it independently. But at the moment, the economics of the situation is that the publishers are able to do that as donations. Um,
They're asking about grant help. Actually, one of the things with the with grants, so as part of the manifesto self-assessment tool, we do actually have at the end of the tool some kind of recommended funders that people could approach for improving their provision. So we try and keep that updated as much as we can because obviously we know things change, but yeah, we do signpost people to that.
so the next question's about AI.
You
So,
can answer that one, Alison.
so does kids in museums consider AI use in their code of ethics or that of their partners? Um, so this is something that we're kind of at the beginning of thinking about. And at the moment where we are is that we don't feel that AI should be replacing any kind of human creativity. So any kind of creative output, any interpretation, anything like that, we don't think AI should be doing that. Also, from a safeguarding point of view, we don't think AI should be used to create any kind of image or film of children, because that would mean that kids' images had been fed into it to create it potentially without their consent. So we say there should be a blanket no to that kind of usage of AI, but we're still in very early stages of figuring it out. So it's not something that we kind of formally codifying. We're trying to add it into our resources where we think it's where we think it's relevant. So in our safeguarding, in our data protection, in things about data protection and things about marketing. So it's slowly going into our resources at the moment.
It's also in the collecting data evaluation consultation resources as well. Um,
But yeah, I should stress we're not AI experts. We are very much looking at it and signposting to people who are.
I think there is a question. PC, I'm assuming that's not your name. Do you want to ask your question? I think you're off mute.
Are you listening?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were looking. I've got the messages down the side. I thought you were looking at. No, just going back to the AI. I thought that that's a really interesting perspective on it because I'm not an AI person. I'm learning myself, and it's a whole new sort of big thing that you need to probably have training on more than me, but to try and conjure up some interesting images to go with information. I found that it was an interesting sort of exercise to do. So I just sort of wanted to I'm really pleased that to have your input, because I think that was probably the view of the centre I'm working for, no AI here. But when I sort of brought up some really interesting pictures, for example, of Neolithic men in their landscape or whatever. I mean, it's very clever, and I was very tempted to think, oh, that'd be interesting to use. But as you say, it's not just the images, is it, that you can produce to enhance something?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what you have to think about any AI image is it's based on an image of a real person that may or may not have been obtained initially with their consent,
Right, right.
unfortunately.
Yeah, fair enough. No, that's good.
So I don't know if there's any other questions. Otherwise, I think Alison, do you want me to just share the final
Yeah,
slide?
just to encourage people to sign up to our newsletters. So we have a range of different newsletters. We do a quarterly research digest where we bring together research from within the museum sector and more widely about families, children, and young people. We have a training newsletter, we have a specific newsletter for Welsh museums, and we have our general museums newsletter, which highlights upcoming opportunities. And also, please do follow us on social media. We are at Kids in Museums. Pretty particularly relevant to you will be our LinkedIn community, which has really grown. But we're also on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky. So yeah, we'd love to have you join our community. And yeah, if you've got any questions after this or want to find out more about anything, there's an email address you can get in touch. And just to say thanks so much for coming. Really lovely to see so many people here. Hope that's been helpful and you've got more of an insight into what we do. And if anyone wants to ask anything they didn't feel able to ask during the session, Laura and I will hang around a bit as people leave and you can chat to us then. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thanks, Rachel. Do you want to press stop?